Hello, everyone, and welcome on into the Week 5 college football gambling preview here on Fox Sports The Gambler. Myself, Joe Tansey, Ryan Beef Coyle, and Mark Henry Jr. And guys, before we get into any of the games for Week 5, one of which is a massive one, there was a big news development today. Excuse me. A big news development today involving UNLV's quarterback, who a lot of you have never heard of and will not care about again after today. But we got to talk about it real quick because it's the hot button issue along with realignment. UNLV is the center of the college football news cycle. It all seems a little bit silly now that all the facts have come out, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I thought an interesting thing I saw about an hour ago on Twitter as well was Jaden Mayava, the UNLV quarterback last year, who transferred to USC thinking that he could be the starter there. He's only the backup, but he transfers out of UNLV, and apparently that was part of the reason as well, due to the NIL promises or money or whatever all the speculation is. He said, she said. So it seems like it's a running theme. They also just had their fourth leading rusher on the season enter the portal. I even saw right before we hopped on, Bear Alexander from USC just entered the portal as well. So this could be a running theme going on and coming forward. But funniest thing I saw all day was someone said this is basically like a drug deal gone bad. You don't have any rule. You don't have any law. It's all a bunch of he said, she said. Someone is going to get screwed at the end of the day. So I'm sure it's not it's the first one, but it's not going to be the last one that we see of this.
You get these things in writing. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure these things out. If you were being offered $100,000 allegedly in NIL money, instead of having just a verbal handshake agreement on it, why don't you get that written down on paper? Because now the UNLV NIL collective can say, well, this wasn't true whatsoever. The coaching staff is like, what are you talking about? And oh, by the way, maybe you should probably do a little more research on your agent there, buddy, because it turns out that that seems like at least the big lie in here that the agent told him he'd get $100K in NIL money, and that was not the case whatsoever. So, look, somebody's not telling the truth. A quarterback that a lot of people didn't care about was in the news for 24 hours, and let's be honest, we're not going to care about him. And the UNLV football team apparently is not going to care about him much after, because if you see all the things on social media today, they're more than ready to get behind the backup, which, by the way, it's a three-man competition. You know, Matt Sluka, the guy who came in from Holy Cross, the one who we're referring to today, won a three-man battle in camp. He wasn't there in the spring. So it's very fascinating to see this all unfold. But the more facts that come out, it seems like there's more fault on the agent's side than anything, and then on the player and the family for not completely getting this down on paper. It seems pretty simple to me where this went wrong. The running back did tweet out that he wasn't transferring because of NIL. Who knows if that's actually the truth behind it, but that's what he did tweet out. So I guess we have to take him for his word. Although that's an awkward time, right, for you to say you're transferring the day of the biggest NIL debacle. And on top of that, UNLV is in the Mountain West for now, but not in the Mountain West, depending on how that shakes out. And the newest realignment rumors, we're at 7-7 in the Pac-12 in the Mountain West, and that benefits absolutely nobody to try and get an automatic berth for your conference champion. So UNLV in the middle of a lot of things, probably for not the best reasons. And look, let's be honest, the realignment thing, I don't know if you guys want to hit on that real quick, but the Pac-12 is doing the right thing by raiding the Mountain West. But I don't know where you go from here if the Mountain West is kind of firm at 7. And I'm hearing reports that UNLV might change their mind because of Utah State, which is the most asinine thing ever, but that's realignment.
My take on realignment and NIL issues and all these types of things is this is off-season conversation. We got games, we got lines, we got totals, we got things to bet on. We got a playoff we could talk about some hypotheticals with. Like, I just think there's real football going on. I don't have any I don't have any interest in the realignment stuff. The Pac-12 can hold their horses and figure it out in January.
Although it is notable, though. It is notable, though. UNLV, apparently Matt Sluka is worth 4 points on the point spread because UNLV dropped to a pick 'em against Fresno State, which I actually like them a lot more now than I did 24 hours ago.
I kind of like I kind of like UNLV there too.
13-4 against the spread the last 2 years, best in the country.
And
it just the boys.
It just feels like a game where they just kind of say "F you" to this guy and move on to the new guy, which it might be the case. So that's gonna be the fascinating thing to follow as well. You talked about the playoff, Mark. Let's get into it because we've had some shifting parts outside of the SEC and the Big Ten. I think the only big development, at least right now, in the SEC is Mizzou might not be as good as we think they are. But that may or may not be a thing. It really depends on how the season shakes out. But going to double overtime against Vanderbilt, not really a great look, but they won. That's all that matters. The Big Ten, Michigan. There's the big one here. Michigan beats USC last week. So when we look into the eyes of the college football playoff, we have Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State as this top tier of the SEC, or not the SEC, the Big Ten. And then Michigan's creeping back in. USC, we still have to keep them in the conversation. But it feels like outside of that, I guess, 11 to 12 team pack from the two major conferences, the number of college football playoff contenders has significantly dropped off in the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, Mizzou is my stock down. I think even if they get to 11-1, they'll get in. But I think if they're a 10-2 team, they'll be kind of like that first team out because that schedule that they have in front of them isn't that great. Struggled against Boston College last week or 2 weeks ago, whenever that was now. Last weekend against Vanderbilt. They just really haven't looked that impressive on paper, too. And they have a few big games where they could go out there and prove some stuff. But I'm there with you, Joe. They were my stock down for this week, this Mizzou team. I was definitely expecting more from them. The defense has been pretty solid to start the year, but the offense, I was expecting to be a much more explosive 35, 40-point type of game offense, and they've been disappointing. So stock down for me for sure is Mizzou, and I think that they could be a team on the outside looking in come selection someday.
Well, we're getting right into it in the bulk of it in our stock up, stock down for the playoff. I'm glad you brought that up right away because my stock down is the entire group of 5 outside of the Mountain West. Because if you look at how we painted this picture even just a week ago, Toledo went into Mississippi State. Now, look, beating Mississippi State this season means absolutely nothing. But the fact that a MAC team went into Starkville and won still raises a few eyebrows. So Toledo popped themselves into the conversation. Northern Illinois, for beating Notre Dame, popped themselves at least into the conversation. Not saying these are actual playoff teams, but because they're, Memphis going to Florida State and winning. Look, that still means something to people who go by name brand. But then you look at those 3 teams. Toledo loses at Western Kentucky. A weather delay in that game screwed everything up, and Western Kentucky came out guns blazing and ended up winning that game. I was on the toppers, so I don't really mind how that game played out. NIU lays an egg at home against Buffalo. And then Memphis, another game I was on with Navy, not to brag or anything, but it was probably the only bets I won. Navy beats Memphis pretty badly. So now we have three more group of 5 contenders just washed away. It seems like it's Boise State or UNLV, and that's it right now. When it comes to the group of 5 contenders, Boise State snuck into the top 25. UNLV, who knows what's going to happen there. Look, I'm sure other teams will emerge.
You know who's laying in the wake.
Go
Sitting
ahead.
at 4-0 already. Liberty, obviously.
I live bet them Saturday night before I went to bed against ECU. They were losing 17-7 to East Carolina. I live bet them at plus 150 at HIP, but week after week, they're not doing anything really to convince me of getting that spot. But they're going to be in there. They're going to be at the table at least.
They have a good quarterback. They put up points, but yeah, they're not special at all. They just play such a garbage schedule that this is their toughest test. Is probably this week. This is probably the shortest favorite they'll be at App State. By the way, I like Liberty. Throw them on my card. Yeah. But I think they're only a 3-point favorite in that game at App State. We saw App State last week. Like, this is not a very good App State team. So if we're saying this is their toughest game, they just lost 48-14 to South Alabama. Like,
can I stop you there for a second? I'll take App State this weekend.
Okay. All right.
I will. I know exactly what you're saying, and I agree with you wholeheartedly. But if Liberty is a team that isn't that great, and they haven't really passed the eye test yet, that's still a tough road game, and App State can get up for it. I think, and I know we're kind of fast forwarding to picks here. I think App State is a sneaky dog. There's a reason why that line's only 3.5, and I think that they got their asses kicked by South Alabama. And by Clemson. But you can expect the Clemson one. But the South Alabama one on Thursday night on a national stage, I think that wakes them up a little bit. I'm not saying they're going to go ahead and win this G5 berth, but I think watch for them as a dog this week. So we've done both of our stock downs for the playoff so far. So Mark, why don't you join the conversation?
I could go a bunch of different ways, but I'll go with Oklahoma just to kind of pick them up and move them out
garbage.
Of the conversation.
Yeah.
Just get rid of them. Jackson Arnold. I can't believe I had to sit through an offseason hearing about Jackson Arnold in Oklahoma and how they're going to come into the SEC. And Beef was absolutely right when I think he brought up last week even that I forget what he said on the pod, that they were going to struggle to make a bowl game or struggle to get the 7 wins. But it's definitely looking like that. And we're in year 3 for Venables now there at Oklahoma.
It 6-year extension already too.
It seems like that offseason of coaching movement that was so kind of unprecedented. It felt like with Brian Kelly goes from Notre Dame to LSU. You had Marcus Freeman go to Notre Dame. You had obviously Venables to Oklahoma, Lincoln Riley to USC, and all of those kind of big jobs are sitting around and they're like, we're not where we thought we'd be 3 years into this. And maybe Notre Dame's the one and that you can excuse a little bit more since they hired a defensive coordinator and not like the big fish where they went and poached a big name like a Lincoln Riley or a Brian Kelly. Is Fickle in year 3 at Wisconsin?
Year 2.
Year 2, okay, never mind. So that doesn't fall under my curse theory of that offseason. But I was thinking about that today.
I'll say this about Oklahoma, and they're playing a team that looks like they made the wrong hire too with Hugh Freeze at Auburn this coming week. Oklahoma could get by with their defense. The problem is they need a quarterback, and the quarterback situation, I think they did the right thing by naming Hawkins, their freshman, a starter. He gave them some pop on offense last week in the second half, even though they were already dead against Tennessee. I watched a few Oklahoma games, and Jackson Arnold just it doesn't have it. I'm sure like somewhere in the Sun Belt will gladly take him for next season, but it's just not popping for him. So I think they have to go to Hawkins. And look, I'm kind of tipping my hand here. I like Oklahoma against Auburn this week, just because Auburn's a dead dog walking, and you can at least say Oklahoma has life on defense, and they'll get behind this new quarterback. But in terms of the playoff, yeah, we ain't talking about them anymore.
Wait, you didn't hear Hugh Freeze say that if they played Arkansas 9 more times, they would have won all 9? I don't know what happened at the other time that actually happened.
He is so full of crap. I mean, it's amazing he got another SEC job.
He is such a huckster. It's unbelievable. There's no one like Hugh Freeze in college football.
Look, you need some of those jabronis as head coaches in college football. That's what makes this world fun. But yeah, he's not long for that job either. Which, shocker, Auburn's going to go through another coaching change.
I can't believe Auburn got swindled into Hugh Freeze. Like, it's actually it's shocking. It's like
it is the perfect Auburn thing, though.
No one thought it was going to work.
No,
not a person.
Except for Auburn. Let's head over to our stock up part of the program here for the playoff. Beef, who is on the rise in your mind when it comes to the 12-team playoff?
I regretfully will say Clemson because they were my stock down a few weeks ago, I think after the Georgia game, actually. But you look at the rest of the schedule coming up, and hat tip to them as well. They've played really well on the offensive side of the ball after that Clemson game, and they've shown the ability to score. Kate Klubnik has certainly looked a lot better. But that schedule from here on out is really easy. Not many tests. I think like one of the biggest tests I thought on that schedule was towards the back half of the year when they traveled to Blacksburg. Still, who knows? That's a night game. Don't rule anything out, but
who knows about them anymore?
yeah. That's what I'm saying. Like, I'm not feeling great about that being a test, but who knows with a night game there. But Clemson, I think, should be able to walk into 10 wins, potentially even, and get to 11. So I think we'll be seeing them versus Miami in the ACC title game. Maybe Louisville has something to say about that. But Clemson, I think, plus 200 right now to make the playoff, I think is worth a look. I think there's a chance that them and Miami could get in, depending on how the top of the SEC shakes out with multiple losses. But Clemson's definitely looking a lot better than after we wrote them off that week 1 game against Georgia.
Mark, I'm going to tee you up for your stock up because I kind of want to do a broader conversation about mine with the other two conferences. So who is your stock up? And maybe this plays into what I'm about to say.
My stock up is Utah. And they went into Oklahoma State last week. I was on Oklahoma State, and man, there are a couple kind of dead dog losers right now in the Big 12 in Oklahoma State and Kansas State. You have to feel, I mean, not to mention even like Kansas and Arizona, but there are a lot of teams we thought would be kind of competing for the Big 12 championship that just don't look the way we thought they were going to look. Oklahoma State, yeah, I won't give away my Heisman stock down, but they just don't look anything like the offense we were hoping for with the running back we were hoping to be a Heisman candidate. And Utah was able to take care of business even without Cam Rising or without Cam Rising playing one play. I do think Kyle Whittingham is too obsessed with like messing with injury reports. It's actually insane, but you look at Utah's schedule now that they got that win home on the road. I put that in confusing terms there, but they have no hard games left. They have 2 ranked games left, and they're BYU, who we don't know what BYU is going to be in 6 weeks. I know that they've been a fun story so far, but that's at home in 6 weeks. And then Iowa State at home in 8 weeks. They don't play any of the other top teams in the Big 12. Not that there are many of them, but Arizona at Arizona State, TCU at home, at Houston, BYU at home, at Colorado, Iowa State at home. And then the one that I think is actually their toughest game left on the schedule is the last game of the year at UCF. I actually think UCF is going to have a pretty decent year this year. So I think that game could be tough in the bounce house, and UCF's a tough place to play. But I think Utah is at max losing 1 game. So I think they're going to be in the Big 12 championship at the very least, which puts them in the conversation.
You mentioned one team there that I'm going to throw in here as a stock up because they are undefeated and their schedule breaks very nicely for them to be in this conversation until mid-November. That's the Iowa State Cyclones. If you're going to buy stock in them, buy stock in them now because of the way the schedule breaks. Now, and this is if you're looking for pure value, right, on the board, and it's kind of what we're speculating. We don't know who's good in the Big 12, but we do know who's bad, right? And we know that Kansas and Arizona probably out of the mix completely. Kansas State, Oklahoma State are playing in a loser leaves town game in Manhattan this week, and K-State's been phenomenal at home. So it seems like everybody thinks K-State's getting through, and Utah's already been sharpied into the Big 12 championship. Well, there are a bunch of other teams that are now waiting to come into the spotlight. UCF is one of them. BYU is one of them. But I think Iowa State, with the way their schedule breaks, their road games between now and November 9th are at Houston and at West Virginia, two places that they can win. UCF does come to Ames, which I think at that point probably be a top 25 matchup if things go their way. But they close with Utah and Kansas State, one on the road, one at home. You look at the makeup of this team now, I guess you call Rocco back to a veteran quarterback now, right? Just looking at teams that are kind of on the fringe of the discussion right now that maybe in 2 to 3 weeks' time we pop up and say, oh, they're 6-7-0, and should we be talking about them a little bit more? I think Iowa State's going to fit that billing.
I'm not a Matt Campbell guy, so that makes me upset to talk about. But it sets up well for them. I just don't believe in them. I don't think they're that good. But
we're going to have
none of these
bunch
teams.
Of these teams.
Yeah.
Right,
I mean,
and this is how it breaks.
Yeah.
This is how it breaks every season, right? Because we have these teams that we thought were contenders preseason that have been completely wiped away from the picture. And now we have these teams, the BYUs, the UCFs, the Iowa States, the world, that second tier of the Big 12. Are they for real? We don't know, but they're going to keep winning, and we have to continue to add them into the conversation. And look, we see this every year, right? It's a very real possibility that the three teams I just mentioned have 2 to 3 losses in conference play, and we're somehow still talking about Kansas State and Utah at the end of the season. Like, that's a very real possibility. But in terms of
what happens,
I think that's what happens as well. But if you look at the way Iowa State's schedule breaks, and who knows how the Big 12 goes, just keep an eye on them real quick. We're gonna do Heisman really quick here because I really want to get into a kind of detailed preview here for Georgia Bama. So, Mark, give me your stock up and stock down for the Heisman race.
I don't even have a stock up ready, so I'll just go stock down. Ollie Gordon, see ya.
Yep.
See ya, buddy. And then I'll say stock up. It's a guy who should be considered, but probably won't be, is Will Johnson. Will Johnson's probably the best player in the country. And I know everyone is going to say that about Travis Hunter, and I think Beef is going to make that argument. And he's probably right in terms of like the value of playing both sides of the ball. But I don't think anyone's better at their position than Will Johnson is at his. And he's going to be a guy I'm obsessed with for the 2025 NFL draft. And I know I do a pod with Shane Haff and Dives, and he's a guy I've already kind of fawned over. I think he's going to be a stud at the next level. I think he's a guy who should get Heisman consideration, but that's not going to happen.
Beef, your stock up and stock down for the Heisman this week.
Yeah, stock up, I'll go with Hunter. I mean, we come on here and say it all the time that what he does on both sides is it hasn't been seen before. I don't think he's, at the end of the day, gets invited. I still think the overall usage is going to be a little bit too much, but he has to be in that conversation. And every notable college football podcast I listen to, I'm sure all those guys have votes. They're all in there talking about how he should be the Heisman. So he's going to be, as long as he stays healthy, in the conversation at least. I just think he's going to be used a little bit too much, that some durability issues will creep up, kind of like they did last year. And then stock down, I'm going to go with Arch. This time last week, him and Ewers were both 20-1 to win the Heisman. Ewers doesn't play last week. He's up to 15-1. Arch all the way down to 40-1. Doesn't really exactly light the world on fire against UL Monroe last week. I think it's pretty safe to say that it's going to be Ewers' job when he's able to return, which I assume will be after the bye week when they play Oklahoma. So Arch, we'll see you next year, buddy. It was a good little run for 1 week on Twitter. Maybe you have a good week against Mississippi State this week, but we'll see you in 2025.
Those conversations were so mind-numbingly dumb that
Where's
I was
Grace at?
About Arch taking over. Unbelievable stuff. But by the way, I will say, people are like, oh, Quinn Ewers could still win the Heisman. I've heard that on multiple podcasts today. Quinn Ewers is not winning the Heisman, missing multiple games. I don't know who I need to tell that. I'd love to go through the Heisman of recent years. I don't think any of them were missing multiple games. Maybe I'm incorrect there, but there's just too many guys out there putting stats up. I mean, look at where Jackson Dart already is. I know he hasn't played anybody, but look at Cam Ward. Like, you think people are going to look at Ewers' stats in 10 games and be like, oh, sorry, more impressive than Dart and Ward or Ashton Jonty or whoever you want to say. Like, I don't see that.
I'll put one caveat to that. If Texas goes undefeated through the SEC and Ewers plays every game, he'll at least be in the mix. Not saying he'll
Yeah,
win.
maybe he'll be in New York. Maybe he'll get
Right.
votes. I don't think he can win if with missing multiple games. I don't think he can win.
That's fair. I just don't know. I mean, look, he's going to miss UL Monroe and Mississippi State.
I think it's more about the stats when we're looking at the end of the
Of a
year.
season.
And it's so short. Yeah, exactly. It's so short of a season. He's only going to have played 10, maybe 11 games with the conference championship factoring in. But I don't think when we look at the stats of a Cam Ward or a Dart who's played 12, 13 games compared to Ewers' stats in 10 games, it's going to be hard for people to give him the nod.
That's fair. I don't disagree with it. I'm just saying, like, I can see in my crystal ball come November, if Texas is still number 1 and undefeated, he'll be in the mix, and people will try and justify it.
I could see it being in the mix. I could see it being like in the conversation. I just can't see him winning.
It's fair. My stuck up, I'm just going to say, because Clemson's going to keep winning, Kate Klubnik. I mean, look, you got to be there. And who would have expected them to put up the offensive numbers that they are? Look, I don't think they're for real, but when you play the fluffy underbelly of the ACC for the rest of the season, you're going to put up numbers, and you got to be there. It's maybe come November, he's 6 or 8 in the discussion. He's probably not number 1, but he'll be there. And it'll just be sitting there at probably 30-1, 40-1, like he is now. And I'm like, oh, Kate Klubnik, still there. My stock down is all the Missouri guys. It's not looking great. This was the time to stat pad, and I know Luther Burden's had some 100-yard games, but people are going to remember you barely beat Vanderbilt. It's just things that stick in everybody's mind. And the light schedule, and look, I was high in Missouri going into the season. I'm not fully convinced on Missouri 4 weeks into it.
Luther Burden's a little overrated. I'm willing to say it. People came into the year like, oh, he's like a top player in the country. He could win the Heisman at receiver. He's best receiver in the country. I watch him, and he's really good. I'm not like blown away though. Like any of the top 3 receivers that just got drafted, like Harrison, Neighbors, Odunze. I think all of those guys jumped off the screen way more in college than a Luther Burden, or even the guy I like in Teddy or McMillan in Arizona. I don't think those guys jump off the screen the same way. Not an incredible receiver class this year.
So let's get into the big one. The first of the big ones this year, Georgia and Alabama, Saturday night in Tuscaloosa. The Dogs are a 2-point favorite, over under sitting at 48.5. A lot of people are making the case that Bama shouldn't be a home dog. It's the first time, since 2009? 7. Look, I know we're split down the middle, it seems like, on this one. So we'll just make this simple. Beef, you give me the case why Bama's going to win, and Mr. Uga down at the bottom of the screen, Mark Henry Jr., after that, you give me the case why Georgia wins.
My first point is real simple, real square, but the fact that they're the home team in this one, I tend to lean towards that. I think college football and college basketball are the 2 sports that I lean towards a home field advantage more than any other, especially NFL, NBA, like MLB, even like we saw with the Phillies last year in the playoffs. We thought that they were invincible. Diamondbacks go in there and win 2 games at home. Like, I value the home field in college football so much more than any other sport. So obviously I have that on my side there. And then I think we see this time and time again in big spots with Patrick Mahomes, the ability on 3rd and 4th downs to use your legs, to have that kind of mobility in these big games, in these close games where you're just going to live and die with the ball in your hand. I like that with Jalen Milroe over Carson Beck and the mobility factor there. I think Jalen Milroe, if he has to have it, whether it's a 7-yard rush or a 15-yard rush, I don't think that Alabama's ever out of it with him with the ball in his hand. So I think on 3rd and 4th down in these clutch situations, I'm going to lean towards Milroe because he can hurt you in both factors. And in close games, you need to convert those type of downs. So that, along with the home field advantage, and Kalen DeBoer has been a damn awesome coach against ranked teams, 12-2. I know he hasn't played Georgia yet, but this is kind of, his welcome to the big league moment, his chance to show the entire country that he's fit to be the Alabama head coach. These guys can meet again down the line. If this game was at Georgia, I would be going with Georgia, but those are the two reasons why I'm leaning towards Alabama in this game, but I think it could shape up to be an all-time classic.
This one actually has less to do with Georgia for me. It has more to do with Alabama. I think I'm you look at Georgia's schedule, they have a lot of landmines. And I was saying in the preseason, I picked them to go undefeated. I would probably back off that now. I would say, though, that I look at the game at Texas and I look at the game at Ole Miss as more dangerous spots than here, especially being the first big game of the year, especially being after a letdown spot 2 weeks ago at Kentucky. I love that they came out and looked flat. And I know that, and I'll get to why I love it in a second because of what I know about them already. But you look at, they came out flat and then they had a week off and they had 2 weeks for Kirby Smart to just tell this team how much they suck and tell this team how much they're going to lose to Alabama by and how they're going to embarrass themselves in this national title or bust, and they're going to lose the 42-game regular season winning streak. I just love how this sets up. And I also love that I think people are overreacting to Alabama beating the heck out of Wisconsin because, I mean, we've been talking about it since the preseason. None of us thought Wisconsin was going to be any good coming into the year. I thought they were going to potentially struggle to make a bowl game, and that was with Tyler Van Dyke. And then you see Tyler Van Dyke get hurt in the first quarter of that game. Wisconsin's playing with their backup quarterback, and yet everybody then goes nuts on Alabama, and they win 42-10 or whatever the score was in that game. I think that win is a little overrated, and I think a lot of the people that are betting on Alabama, and Beef didn't really even bring up the Georgia-Kentucky game like I think a lot of people normally would when they're betting on Bama, but I don't think people realize that you look at the box score and Bama beat USF 42-16. That game was 14-13 with 9 minutes left in the fourth quarter. To me, that's just as concerning as a close game with Kentucky on the road in an SEC road game. And I know Kentucky's not that good, but I think that they're a good bit better than USF. And that was a road game, not a home game. So, and it's also I just think Georgia's so well-rounded with NFL guys at every position. I think the X factor is Trevor Etienne, the guy who transferred from Florida. He missed the Clemson game, missed kind of the second game as well. He played the Kentucky game, got 19 carries, didn't really look that good, only had 4 yards per carry. But I would expect him to kind of look like the guy we thought he was transferring in. And not to mention, we just talked about Clemson, how they've looked. They've scored 125 points in the last 2 games since they played Georgia. That offense only scored 3. Against Georgia. Georgia's given up 3-3-12 so far. So I love Georgia. This is my favorite bet of the year so far. So you guys can clown me when Bama wins by 40, but this is my GOTY as Big Cat would call it. So I'm all over Georgia. I locked it in at -1.5. I'll probably bet it again.
So I think you both have very compelling points to me. And the history of the Georgia-Alabama games in the last 5 years doesn't suggest this. But I'm actually going to take the under at 48.5. And the reason why I do that is because I think Georgia's going to come out motivated. I really do. I think the X factor here is Georgia's defense. How do you deal with how do you deal with Milroe? How do you deal with the environment in Tuscaloosa? I think they'll be suited for that. I don't think the environment there is gonna really bug them much, if at all. But I think the way they play defensively, and Alabama's going to have to match that. And I don't think Georgia's offense is perfect either yet. Like we saw in the fourth quarter of the Kentucky game, they came alive. But how much of that was just pure desperation? I don't know if we've seen the final product out of Georgia's offense yet. So I'm going to go the under 48.5. I think this is probably a 21-13. 24-20 type of game. I think it's going to be very close. I think it's going to come down to the wire, but I do think it's going to be a low scoring kind of game.
You're not going to bet a side on this one?
I would lean Georgia. If I had to bet, I would bet Georgia.
I'll go 27-14, 27-17, 27-14, something like that.
I think if you like Alabama, it's going over. I think if you like Georgia, it's more like to go under. I think if Alabama wins, it's going to be because it's going to be because they get a couple explosive 40-yard plus touchdowns or something to open it up. Because if it gets into a drag out slugfest type game, I would lean Georgia, but I'm gonna go Alabama getting a few big plays over the top.
I guess you can make the argument if you're a Bama backer that if you think Georgia's offense just stinks, then you could argue for a low-scoring game. I will say Carson Beck's been a much better passer than Jalen Milroe this year. He's got over 100 passing yards more, better QBR, better passer rating. So I do think some of the Georgia offensive concerns, like that offense looked pretty darn good for the second half against Clemson. And obviously we've only seen him 3 times, but I think that some of the concerns are a little overblown.
So we've done Georgia, Alabama, and that is the big game. It's where everybody's going to be focused on. But there are a few other games throughout the schedule this week that are just notable. And I kind of want to do some quick hitters on each of these games that they do affect the college football playoff. And the first one of those is Oklahoma State and Kansas State. Look, okay, Oklahoma State losing at home against Utah, fine. I get that. I understand how that happened. But Kansas State laying an egg at BYU, and that game flipped in that end of first half sequence where BYU just scored and took the lead rapidly against them and forced Avery Johnson into some bad turnovers. You have Kansas State at home, a place where Chris Kleiman has been pretty darn good. You have Oklahoma State in desperate spot. And if Kansas State, I just looked at this game without teams on the other side, I probably bet Oklahoma State because this is how Gundy operates. He loses the big one at home and then pulls a trick out of his butt in the next week. But because it's Kansas State, I'm going to stay away from this. I just want to get you guys' thoughts on this game. 2 very desperate football teams in the Big 12.
I feel like this is an ugly game. I actually like the under in this one, a 55. I think both teams' morale is low. It could come out a little bit sluggish, especially early. You look at Oklahoma State, whenever someone plays Utah the next week, they seem to come out slow as well. And Kansas State, they can't really have much confidence after what happened to BYU with BYU last week. So I think this one actually is going to go under. If you made me pick a side, I probably would lean Kansas State at home under Kleiman. They've been really good, 14-6 against the spread after a loss, and 18-8 against the spread as a home favorite. And I feel like Oklahoma State is so reliant on Ollie Gordon getting going, and he's not even averaging 4 yards per carry on the season. So,
not happening.
Yeah, I think a little too much tread on the tires. Like his NFL draft stack, I'm not sure where that was projected at the beginning of the year, but it can't be looking good right now because he looks like he's an old, broken down running back already at the ripe age of 22, 23 years old.
Doesn't look great.
He's cooked. I think he's cooked. I think you're totally right there. I would lean Kansas State, but this is a total stay away. It's a loser leaves town match for sure. Whoever loses this game, I don't want to hear about for the rest of the year.
2 more games. One of the ACC adjacent, Louisville and Notre Dame. First real test for Louisville. Notre Dame's looked pretty good since beating Northern Illinois, but look who they played. I know you're Mr. Skeptical down there, Mark. So I'll start with you there. What do you expect out of Louisville and Notre Dame? A 15-16 matchup.
I think this line's crazy. I think Louisville has a wild coaching advantage. They saw it last year when they beat Notre Dame. I know that was at home, but I know Louisville hasn't really played anybody, but I also don't think that they've given anybody reason to doubt them that they stink either. Like they handled business against 2 cupcakes and they beat Georgia Tech handily at home, which they should. They won, they covered. Yada yada yada. Like I think Louisville is the better team here. I think they should be favored. I don't understand why Notre Dame's favored. I won't bet it. I won't watch it. But if I wasn't involved tangentially, I would bet Louisville.
Beef, I'll get your take on this one. Illinois going to the Happy Valley. It's a night game. It's a whiteout, I believe. Is Penn State getting too many points here after what we saw from Illinois at Nebraska last Friday?
Yeah, the line jumped off the page to me. I might be falling into potentially the biggest trap of the weekend here, but I really like Illinois. I had the flight at 3. I had to wake up at 3, so I didn't watch the whole game. I went to bed at halftime, but that was an impressive first half from Illinois. To go into Nebraska in that sellout environment, Friday night, standalone game, that was an impressive game, a game that showed a lot of balls for Illinois to go in there and win. And shout out to Luke Altmaier. He's playing great. 10 touchdowns through the air so far. no turnovers. And, Bielema's always going to have that team ready to go, especially on the defensive side. So I think they can certainly go in there and match Penn State early. I like them. I already bet them to cover the 18. But am I falling into a big trap there? Like, that line doesn't make sense to me at all. So it's a bit of a head scratcher. It's either going to be the easiest cash of the season or the biggest what the hell were you thinking bet.
I agree. Illinois plus 18 stood out right away. I think Penn State wins the game, but Bielema is going to have them so sound defensively. And like you said, Luke Altmaier has turned into a pretty competent quarterback for Illinois. And look, I know Lincoln and Happy Valley are two completely different road environments, but to say you've already gone on the road in a hostile environment, a top 25 game, I think that means something. Again, not saying they'll win, but I think 18 is kind of an egregious number. I think that number should probably be closer to within 2 touchdowns.
Yeah, I thought more so along the lines of like West Virginia game, like 9.5, 10, something in that ballpark.
Are there any other games on the schedule, boys, that stand out to you? Some of them have lost a little bit of luster after a few weeks, but is there anything that sticks out to you on the schedule just in general?
I guess we mentioned Boise State earlier as like a group of 5, a potential playoff team. I think one of the fun games of the weekend is at 10 o'clock with Washington State at Boise. Washington State's also one of those other teams that could potentially be in the mix for that group of 5 spot. So this is going to be kind of a loser leaves town match for that a little bit as well. And Boise, we've talked about it before. They have maybe the best loss in the entire country with a close road loss at Oregon. So I actually like Boise a lot, laying. I think it's a touchdown. Might be up to 7.5 now. I think Boise lays it on them on the blue turf there against Wazoo. I don't think Wazoo is anything special. You look last week at what Wazoo did. They played San Jose State. They gave up 52 points. They gave up like 9 yards of carry to the running backs. So Ashton Jonty, step right up, player. Like I think he's going to have like 200 yards and 3 touchdowns. So I don't know if there's any college, if you can bet on Ashton Jonty props, or if you can. If there's any college fantasy football stuff, like I think Ashton Jonty probably take the overs because I think he has a big night.
Look, his number's probably going to be insane. I saw last week, I almost went into Jersey to bet some player props. San Jose State's receiver Nick Nash, who's a very good receiver. His over-under in receiving yards was like 110.5. Which so some of these numbers are insane. Look, they're insane for a reason, but they're also insane. Beef, is there a game a little bit off the radar from the top 4 that we talked about that stands out to you?
Yeah, I got 2 real quick. One SEC, one Big 12. I really like UCF minus 14 against Colorado. I think they run it 55, 60 times and right down Colorado's throat. I think that one could get out of hand quickly. And I think like my low-key game of the day, other than Alabama, Georgia, that I'm looking forward to the most is Arkansas and Texas A&M. I got a weird feeling
that game's always stupid.
Yeah, I got a feeling it's going to be a crazy, like maybe go like 52-49 and then like 4 overtime, something weird like that. But I really like this Arkansas team. I had them plus 3.5 last week at Auburn, and I had them on the money line. They're a fun watch. I think coming into the year, we all expected a 3-win team, 4-win team out of them. I think they're more so a 7-8 win team, and they're a fun, exciting watch. You could look at them; they could be undefeated right now if they didn't blow that game at Oklahoma State. So I think that they're a live dog in that matchup. But I'm going to bet the over in that game too. I just have a feeling in my bones in that one that we're going to get some weird points down in Jerry World. A fun game on Saturday afternoon.
That game is always off its rocker. That game always, for whatever reason, turns into just like the most ridiculous up and down track meet of some sort. So yeah, I'd probably bet the over in that game more than anything.
I can't believe Bobby Petrino is saving Sam Pittman's job.
Insane.
Yeah, I know you usually talk about hot seats. That's got to be one big seat for Sam Pittman. So I don't know. He's really easing what's the lazy boy. Bobby Petrino's taking off the heat recliner. That was a bad job by me. Couldn't put that.
I'll give you guys 2 money in the crumbs to finish this off because I gave you Navy and I gave you Western Kentucky last week at the end of the show. There's 2 of them that sticks out to me. Western Kentucky again. They're a 13-point dog at Boston College. I think they might even be live on the money line. And the reason why, because Boston College the last 2 weeks has given up over 240 passing yards to Missouri and Michigan State. Obviously, they're Power 5 conference, they're Power 4 conference teams. But what does Western Kentucky love to do? Throw the ball. Their air raid offense. They just throw the ball. They move the rock, they throw it downfield, and that's how they win a majority of their games. So I think that's a vulnerability in Boston College's defense that Western Kentucky can exploit. I think BC, they're going to have to try and drive the ball with the run through Castellanos and their slew of running backs. Don't know if that's going to work, though. I think Western Kentucky can score with BC. I think the plus 13 is very much in play, and I would probably go out on a limb and sprinkle a little bit on the money line. The other one, Eastern Michigan minus 15 at Kent State. Eastern Michigan's 4-0 against the spread. Kent State, arguably the worst team in the FBS, and their starting quarterback out for the season. They couldn't move the ball in the first place. So why are they going to move the ball now? Eastern Michigan minus 15. I would take them up to like 20 against Kent State. EMU's been a pretty tough team early on. They stuck within 3 touchdowns against Washington, covered that spread, and went on the road and not won the road, but ended up playing a really tough game against Jacksonville State, who I think we're still trying to figure out what they are at the Group of 5 level. But Kent State has not covered the spread whatsoever this year, and they've been a dog of 48 points twice.
They couldn't or they covered that first half damn spread against Penn State last week, of course. God damn it.
I'll throw one out. I think a kind of a bounce back spot. I think Nebraska lays it on Purdue. Purdue, we saw it against Notre Dame. Notre Dame, who I obviously don't think is very good, 66-7 against Purdue. And I know it was an obvious get-right spot for them, but it's an obvious get-right spot for Nebraska. And their offense looked pretty good, obviously, even in that loss against Illinois. So I think Raiola comes up and puts it on Purdue's defense. So Cornhuskers big. Is beef on that as well?
I'm smoking my Coach Siggs again this week with minus.
Oh, Coach Siggs, you gotta throw it out there too. Indiana might be one of my favorite bets of the weekend. Yeah. I love Indiana against Maryland. It's so funny because he's so new to the Big Ten. There's such a massive coaching advantage there between Coach Siggs and that bum Mike Locksley at Maryland, who feels like he's been there for 50 years. I'll ask you guys, because you guys, I know Tansey and Beef, you guys are probably even more well-versed on these types of teams than I am, but one that stood out to me, I kind of like USF plus, it was at 6.5, it's actually 5.5 now. I kind of like USF plus the points there against Tulane. I think they're live in the game. That might even be worth a sprinkle on the money line. You look at the teams and it's like, we're downgrading USF because they lost to Bama and Miami. Like, that seems a little unfair.
For 3 quarters, they hung with both of those teams.
Yeah. And then you look at K-State, or you look at Tulane, and they're getting a lot of credit for hanging with a K-State team that just lost 38-9 to BYU. And they're getting a lot of credit for losing by 15 and failing to cover against an Oklahoma team that I think stinks. So I just think you look at the resumes, that's not always the best way to bet these games, but I think that you could argue this should be like at least a pick 'em.
I think you can argue, too, that Byron Brown's the best player on the field.
Yes.
The USF quarterback. Now, this is the reason why I haven't bet it yet, and I think he's going to be okay. But he did leave the Miami game with a leg injury. I'm not sure if it was just cramping or not, but everything seems to be okay with him. That's why I didn't bet it right away, because that line stuck out to me immediately as well. Yeah, I think USF is one of the liver dogs on the slate this week.
Yeah, I don't love a lot of dogs. Big favorite week for me. So that's USF and Arkansas really are the only 2 dogs that I have my eye on.
And just to note, the spread on UNLV is now up to 2 points. So take
it don't matter.
Take that as you will. But to put a bow on everything, UNLV.
Sorry. I had 2 big favorites. I wanted to ask you guys. I'm only going to bet one of them. I'm going to take one of them off my card. I like USC. It's like 15.5 now. Both of the lines that went up. I liked it at 14 more, but it's at 15.5, 16. I think it's kind of a similar thing to Nebraska. I think they respond from last week and put it on a Wisconsin team that's clearly reeling, that's traveling the country. Or Do I go with Oregon, which is now, I think, minus 25.5 at a UCLA team that hung a little tougher than I expected against LSU, but I still think overall sticks.
I think Oregon.
Yeah.
Oregon would be my bet of the two. Yeah.
Okay.
I was talking with Brace about that earlier. If you're chasing a loss on Saturday night, bet Oregon first half spread minus 14.5. Fall asleep by about 12:30 and wake up feeling right for Sunday morning.
All right.
That's
all right.
fair.
I'll go Oregon.
I think that would be. I think it's a fair outcome. I don't think that game's close. That's a fall asleep special. Well, that will do everything for week 5 here on our Fox Sports The Gambler college football betting preview. For Mark Henry Jr. and Ryan Beef Coyle, I am Joe Tansey. Best of luck on all your bets, and we'll be back here with some reaction to Georgia and Bama next week, as well as the first October slate to break down. It's already here. It's already around the corner. Conference play is heating up. Let's win some bets here in college football, and we'll talk to you next week.